And this is a diagram of one of the 19th century grinding machines. There's the rollers there, you can see them there. So you can imagine the paint going through like this. And this is a late 16th century illustration of men in the studio. The painter's over here somewhere, you can't see him. Grinding, pouring the oil onto the paint, grinding with the mortar on the stone slab to make the paint. As a result, with machine grinding, the pigment could be very much more finely ground, which, with the new intensely coloured pigments, was no disadvantage. In fact, as many pigments, like the chrome yellows, emerald green, and the madder lakes, were produced by precipitation, they had a small particle size and did not need much grinding. The pigment could also be very much more efficiently mixed with the oil. A machine does not get tired and does the work of several men. In practice, rather less oil is needed than with hand-ground paint because the process is more efficient, although it's not clear if any artist was aware of this. When artists like Van Gogh were complaining about the amount of oil present and blotting it out with paper, poorly prepared hand-ground paint is just as likely to have been the problem. The paint was made on such a large scale that its handling properties were usually consistent, although of course this would depend on who was filling the tube. On the other hand, there was a loss of the immediate connection between the artist and his paint. In former times, the artist could oversee or even carry out all the preparation of the paint to his or her liking in the studio. The assistant ground the paint on a slab. Pigments need different amounts of oil to make a workable paste, and the machine could not take this into account. The texture of the paint produced by machine grinding was rather uniform and not to everyone's liking. In practice, however, many artists did build up a relationship with their colourman. Delacroix and his colourman Harrow, Pissarro, Cézanne and Van Gogh with Julien Tanguy. Even the large companies, Lefranc in Paris, Winsor & Newton, Rowney, Robeson in London, would receive letters from artists wanting a particular varnish made up, a particular pigment to be made available. This was important as, since the days of the artist with his assistant grinding the colours, there had been a loss of understanding of the technical process of painting. This was not taught in art schools. They had always concentrated on drawing. The handling of materials and the process of painting had to be learned in the studio of another painter or from a book, particularly if one was an amateur. And the 19th century saw the publication of many small, cheap, how-to-do-it manuals on sale at the art shops. Artists felt very much in the hands of the paint manufacturers and colour merchants and held them responsible when things went wrong. Defective paint could be the result of a fault in manufacture of one of the ingredients, but it could also be down to poor grinding or filling of the tube. Not all pigments were compatible with one another. Throughout the century, from the work of George Field in the early years in England to the 1888 Russell and Abney report on the fading of watercolours, also in England, and in France, Viber's extremely influential book on the science of painting, which was published in 1891, there was a growing preoccupation with the quality and stability of artist colours. As a result of this, pigments came to be graded according to permanence. Artists obtained information about the pigments they knew little about, either from books like Viber's, or from those manufacturers who had taken note of their concerns and published information in their catalogues. Winsor & Newton in England and Lefranc and Bourgeois in France are examples. Lefranc made the pigments recommended by Vibert available as a named range. For artists like Seurat or Morbelli, Segantini or Pellizza, and the other painters who were preoccupied with the accurate representation of the appearance of colour and light, brilliance and purity of colour were paramount. But so was permanence. The information they were able to obtain from the manufacturer, and the Italians used Lefranc as they didn't like what there was available locally, enabled them to achieve their aims. And here we have Segantini's comments, and he says, for the past 10 years, I've used only colours, diluents and varnishes made by Lefranc of Paris. To begin with, I used a great variety of colours, but while painting under the sky, the sun, the rarefied atmosphere of an altitude of over 2,000 meters, I should say he works in the Italian Alps, so he is at over 2,000 meters, I realized that certain colors faded, others darkened, becoming opaque. I took all these beautiful, brilliant, and fascinating colors and sent them back to Lefranc to exchange, keeping only those that are good, stable, permanent. This is a larger picture of the Lefranc catalogue, and this shows only some of the pigments that Lefranc sell, because the greens there, that sort of thing, are on the opposite page, which is not photographed. And what they do is they use these asterisks here to indicate permanence. So 2 stars is permanent, 1 star is not bad, no stars, they're not going to vouch for the permanence of those. And it's quite significant that the Madder Lakes, here Lac de Garance, merit 2 stars, and so does antimony yellow, jaune d'antimoine, which is a sort of Naples yellow, it contains antimony. And there are some other colours as well. But the so-called aniline lakes, there they are. There's the geranium lake. These are Perkins, Mauvine, and also methyl violet. They don't get any stars at all. They're not permanent. By the end of the century, the aims and passions of painters had taken many different paths. We've seen that they used the optical and technological discoveries of the century in their attempts to paint the shifting appearance of the world around them as it moved and ran, galloped, went by train, stopped for coffee, and as night turned to day. The different interpretations of the effects of light, both natural and artificial, how colour behaves and the effects this has on the appearance of objects, was perhaps the most important artistic or aesthetic achievement of the century. But the careful application of more or less accurately calculated colour on the painting counts for nothing if the pigment used is of poor quality or impermanent colour. It is impossible to imagine the achievements of Seurat, the Impressionists, Morbelli and the Italian Divisionists without the stable, reliable pigments of brilliant, pure colour that appeared during the century, the products of intellectual achievement in chemistry and its technological applications. The achievements of Seurat, Morbelli, and the rest led on to the works of Picasso and the Cubists in one direction, Matisse and the Fauves in another, Bala, Boccioni, and the Futurists in a third. Without their studies and trials as a foundation, these would not have happened. Thank you.